Italian hedge fund manager, never, ever marry an American woman. Thank you for watching the Shakaama Live Show with your host, Shakaama. Italian hedge fund manager star Davide Serra told a married female New York Times reporter that the advice he gives to his friends is to never ever marry an American woman. From the Times, quote, "Never ever marry an American woman. That's the advice I give my friends." It may seem an odd way to start an interview, especially one with a female American reporter who is married. But Davide Serra, an Italian hedge fund manager based here in London, is not one to opine gently or particularly carefully. According to the Times, Serra finds that American women are too demanding. Serra, who runs a $2.5 billion Algebris investment based in London, is able to divide his time managing a fund, advising governments on policy issues, spending time with his family, and outdoor adventures such as backcountry skiing, mountain climbing, and spear fishing. Quote, "My wife is the real asset in my balance sheet," Serra told the Times. He's married to an Italian woman who's a former model turned interior designer. He's also crushing it this year. His fund was reportedly up 30% through May 31st. All this said, we can't help but wonder what in the world happened to Serra in his past experience with American women. Still, what Mr. Serra says about Europe and the global financial Serra in this industry is not, if not matrimony, has caught the ear of investors and European policymakers alike. He runs Algebris Investments, a $2.5 billion hedge fund that has been successful investment in financial services company around the world. And his sometimes acerbic perspective on banks and government policy have been in high demand as Europe has stumbled from crisis to stress test to recovery and potentially back to crisis again. Speaking out sets him apart from most hedge fund managers here, who typically go to extensive and expensive lengths to avoid a speck of attention. Yet Mr. Serra, 44, is advising government for free and issuing policy papers to central banks and financial chiefs, all the while putting forward plenty of unvarnished opinions. When the British Treasury increased a bank tax, Mr. Serra called the move stupid and predicted that it would shave 10% off London's gross domestic product if HSBC and Standard Chartered relocated their headquarters as a result. The billions of dollars in fines that banks have paid for the improper selling of payment protection insurance, quote, "extortion done on a national level," he said. "You don't leave your bank in the hands of scavengers." After he was caught walking into 10 Downing Street with a presentation labeled RBS, the Royal Bank of Scotland, and news cameras caught it with a telephoto lens, he said that he should have walked in with a Playboy magazine. His investment returns, however, match his bravado. Through May 31st, his global financial funds was up 30% and his credit fund was up 5.6%. The MSCI World Financials Index was up 4.01% during the same period. Investing in financial services not for the faint-hearted. When economies grow, financial sectors stocks often soar. When crisis hit, they plummet, making timing particularly important. In late 2011, Mr. Serra bet that Europe would not fall apart. He was too early. As Europe sat on the precipice, his equity fund fell 45% and his credit fund 17%. Many investors rushed to withdraw their money. But George Soros liked the trade and gave him $500 million, another investor in Mr. Serra's fund said. Europe turned around, and since then Mr. Serra has returned 100% in both strategies. Mr. Serra declined to comment on whether Mr. Soros is or was an investor. Now, with Europe whipsawed by yet another round of what will happen to Greece, Mr. Serra is being again on Europe's recovery. He thinks that as the United States and Britain move towards raising interest rates, the European Central Bank will continue its bond buying program known as quantitative easing for another 5 years. His funds are currently geared for recovery but hedging against catastrophe, namely that, Jesus Christ, how come I couldn't pronounce that? Namely that Greece has a disorderly exit from the euro or the American and British central banks shift too quickly towards raising rates. Quote, I learned a lot in 2011, said Mr. Serra. People don't always do the rational thing. He says he has sharply reduced the risk in his portfolio as he has been waiting out Greece. At the same time, he is betting against Spanish and Portuguese bond. Same thing that I have already said. Among his favorite investments are convertible contingent bonds or COCOs. These bonds convert to equity if banks' capital falls beneath a certain level. He has a 1 billion COCO fund that has returned 5.6% this year. Mr. Serra spent 10 years as a research analyst covering banks, first at UBS and then Morgan Stanley, where he was head of the European Bank research team. When a banker came in one day to complain about a negative rating Mr. Serra had on the stock of a company from which the banker was hoping to win business, Mr. Serra picked up the phone and asked to be transferred to compliance. The banker panicked. Quote, we got along beautifully after that, Mr. Serra said. Investors said Mr. Serra's strength is understanding complicated credit productions. Quote, they get the balance sheet of the largest European banks, said one Italian executive at a large European insurance company. He has a lot of relationships, but he is still a very independent thinker. Not everyone is taken by him. Quote, he's a big character, said one senior hedge fund consultant who spoke on the condition of anonymity because of works he did with Mr. Serra. He recalled Mr. Serra telling a joke about prostitutes that did not go over well with a crowd of Americans. Others, however, applaud his forthright manner. I like this guy, sounds like me. Quote, he is constructively direct, said Cole Keller, president of Morgan Stanley's institutional securities business. Mr. Serra's latest policy worked on a dearth of equity financing in Europe. After 6 months of research into what was stalling growth, he and his team concluded that less than 0.3% of European savings is invested in the equity of small and mid-sized enterprises in Europe, despite the fact that those businesses account for 70% of the jobs, which is exactly what I have been saying here in the United States. Quote, why is Europe not growing, he said. There is no equity. It's absolutely crazy. A letter and a 13-page presentation were sent off to a who's who in global financial with prescribed regulatory changes to free up capital. Perhaps not surprisingly, Mr. Serra is considering starting a small private equity fund to invest growth capital in Italian companies. And he recently started a fund to invest in non-performing loans in Italy. Mr. Serra has been a strong supporter of Matteo Renzi, the Prime Minister of Italy, whom he has called the only politician worth backing in the past 20 to 30 years, and Italy's last hope. He offers Mr. Renzi free advice, as he does to British Prime Minister and central banks, both when he is asked and when he is not. A native of Genoa who was educated in Milan, Norway, and Belgium, Mr. Serra revels in being a sort of Davos man. His office is filled with enormous pictures of himself on the 12,500-foot peak of Aguile de la République, or sailing on his yacht with his family through icebergs in Greenland, or in the Galapagos. During an interview, he arrives on crutches because he has shattered his tibia in 16 places off-piste skiing, another passion. He mentions that he recently caught a 40-kilo amberjack while spearfishing, broken-legged and all. Mr. Serra said he was intensely focused. Quote, I believe in performance, he said. That applies to managing monies, which he does for a 1% management fee and a 10% performance fee, lower than many other hedge funds, and sport. He acknowledges, however, that such focus comes at a cost. He went to his first concert ever just last year, and that is how the subject of spouses, and specifically wives, came up. How does he have time to work on policy issues, manage the fund, ski in the backcountry, spearfish, climb peaks, and spend 4 weeks each year boating around with his wife, Anna, and 4 children, also prominently displayed in many photos? Quote, "My wife is the real asset on my balance sheet," he said. She is Italian, a former Gucci model and interior decorator, and apparently not nearly as demanding as he believes American wives to be. Thank you for watching the Shakaama Live Show.